She gave up the meal she waited weeks to afford, but by morning, her past and future collide on her doorstep. What if giving away your only meal meant saving your daughter's life? This is Clara Mae Thompson, a single mother washing dishes at the Bluebird Diner for minimum wage. Her daughter's asthma medication costs $68 she doesn't have. Tonight, after weeks of hunger and debt, she finally saved enough for a hot dinner. But just as the storm outside reaches its peak, an elderly couple walks in, wet, stranded, and desperate. Clara doesn't know it yet, but the choice she's about to make will change everything. A single act of kindness costs nothing, but for Clara, it was about to cost everything she had. Her daughter's life depended on a bottle of pills she could no longer afford. Tonight, she would have to make a choice that would either save a stranger or condemn her own child. The small digital clock on the nightstand glowed with the unforgiving numbers. 4:45 a.m. Clara Mae Thompson didn't need an alarm. The worry was its own kind of rooster, crowing in her soul long before the sun had the courage to peek over the horizon. Every morning began with the same silent ritual, a quiet calculation of dread and dwindling hope. She swung her legs out of bed, the thin mattress groaning in protest. The floorboards were cold against her bare feet, a constant reminder of the broken furnace and the coming winter. She tiptoed across the small room, her steps practiced and light. In the corner, her 7-year-old daughter, Penny, slept in a cocoon of mismatched blankets. Penny's breath was a soft, rhythmic whistle, a sound that was both her greatest comfort and her deepest fear. It was the sound of childhood asthma, a relentless condition that clung to her small lungs like a shadow. Clara paused beside the little bed, her hand hovering just above Penny's chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall. Each breath was a victory. Each wheeze was a reminder of the mountain of debt that stood between her daughter and true wellness. The latest bill from the specialist was tucked under a magnet on the refrigerator, its bold, red numbers a constant accusation. $2,847. It might as well have been $1 million. That was on top of the thousands already owed to the hospital, the pharmacy, the laboratories. The debt was a living thing, a monster that fed on her meager paycheck from the Bluebird Diner, leaving only scraps behind. In the small, galley-style kitchen, Clara pulled out the worn shoebox that served as their bank. She emptied its contents onto the chipped Formica countertop. A few wrinkled dollar bills and a handful of coins. She counted it twice, her lips moving silently, as if the motion might somehow conjure more. $11.42. Enough for Penny's lunch at school, the bus fare to the diner, and maybe, if she was careful, a small cup of soup for her own dinner. The prescription for Penny's inhaler sat on the counter beside the money, a stark, white piece of paper that felt heavier than a tombstone. It cost $68. $68 she did not have. The pharmacy would not give her any more credit. The pharmacist, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, had looked at her with pity in his eyes yesterday. "I'm sorry, Clara Mae," he'd said, his voice gentle. "I can't extend it any further." Her eyes drifted to the wall above the small kitchen table. There, in a simple wooden frame, was a black and white photograph of her grandfather, Sergeant Elias Thompson. He stood tall and proud in his uniform, his gaze steady, his jaw set with a determination that seemed to have skipped a generation. He was a hero, a man who had earned a Silver Star for pulling 3 men from a burning tank. He had come home from the war with shrapnel in his leg, but with his principles intact. "Character ain't what you do when folks are watching, Clara Mae," he used to tell her, his voice a low rumble. "It's what you do when you think you're all alone. It's about making the hard right instead of the easy wrong." She often wondered what he would think of her now. Would he see her quiet desperation as a failure? Or would he see the fight in her, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined his own life? She pulled on her worn jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt, the same uniform she wore most days. It was clean, but the fabric was thin, offering little defense against the biting November wind that whistled through the window frames. "Mommy." Penny's voice was small and sleepy from the other room. Clara hurried back to the bedroom, a smile forcing its way onto her face. "Morning, sweet pea. Time to get ready for school." Penny sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Can I have pancakes today?" Clara's heart clenched. They had flour and water, but no eggs, no milk, no butter. "Not today, honey, but I'll make you some special cinnamon toast. Your favorite." Penny's small face fell for just a moment before she brightened. With extra cinnamon? A whole mountain of it, Clara promised, her voice catching slightly. She turned away before Penny could see the tears welling in her eyes. It was the small things that broke her heart the most. The innocent requests she couldn't grant. The simple childhood joys that were casualties of their poverty. The walk to the bus stop was a journey through a town of two faces. They passed rows of modest houses like their own, their porches sagging and their paint peeling. Then, just a few blocks over, the neighborhood transformed. Large, pristine homes sat behind manicured lawns and iron fences. Expensive cars sat gleaming in the driveways. Clara held Penny's hand a little tighter, shielding her from a world that felt both a stone's throw and a million miles away. Penny, oblivious, skipped along, pointing out squirrels and crunching autumn leaves under her small sneakers. To her, the world was still full of simple wonders. Clara prayed it would stay that way for as long as possible. At the bus stop, she tucked the lunch money into Penny's coat pocket and kissed her forehead. Be good for Mrs. Davison, you hear? I'll see you tonight. Love you, Mommy. I love you more, sweet pea. She watched the big yellow bus pull away, a plume of exhaust hanging in the cold air. For a moment, she stood alone, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The $68 for the inhaler was a constant hum in the back of her mind. The last refill was almost empty, maybe 2 or 3 puffs left. It was a terrifyingly small buffer against a full-blown asthma attack. She had to find a way. An extra shift? Gus, her boss at the diner, was already giving her as many hours as he could. Borrow money. She had already exhausted the kindness of her few friends. Her own bus arrived, and she climbed aboard, her mind a frantic storm of impossible solutions. She took a seat by the window and watched her town roll by. The abandoned textile mill on the edge of town, a skeleton of broken windows and rusted steel, where so many people, including her own father, had once earned a decent living. Now, it was just a monument to a time when hard work was enough. The Bluebird Diner was a relic from another era, a long, narrow car of chrome and faded turquoise vinyl. It sat on the corner of Maple and 6th, a stubborn holdout against the encroaching fast food chains. Its neon sign, with a sputtering blue bird, cast a warm, welcoming glow in the pre-dawn gloom. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, bacon, and years of conversation. Gus, the owner, was a large man with a permanent scowl etched on his face, but his eyes were kind. He was wiping down the counter as she came in, his movements methodical and practiced. He nodded at her, a silent greeting that meant, "You're on time." "Good morning, Gus," she said, tying her apron. "Morning, Clara May. Coffee's fresh." Brenda, the morning waitress, was already pouring coffee for a couple of truck drivers in a corner booth. She was in her 50s, with a cascade of blonde hair and a laugh that could cut through the morning rush. She gave Clara a warm smile. "Hey, hon, rough morning?" Clara just shrugged, not wanting to unload her burdens. "Same as always." Brenda patted her shoulder. "Well, you're here now. Let's make some money." Clara's job was in the kitchen, a world of steam, clattering plates, and relentless heat. She was the dishwasher, the one who stood for hours in front of the big industrial sink, her hands plunged in scalding, soapy water. It was hard, thankless work, but it was honest. Her hands were raw and chapped, the skin on her knuckles cracked and red. These were not the hands of a young woman. They were the hands of a survivor. As she worked, her body moving in a familiar rhythm of scrub, rinse, stack, repeat, her mind was free to wander. She thought about Penny's upcoming parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Davison had said Penny was bright, a wonderful artist, but quiet. Too quiet. Clara knew it was because Penny worried. At 7 years old, her daughter was already learning the language of adult anxiety, sensing her mother's stress like a change in the weather. Through the small, greasy window above the sink, she could see the world pass by. Businessmen in sharp suits talking on their phones, mothers herding children into minivans, construction workers laughing on their coffee break. They all seemed to be moving forward, their lives following a predictable path. Her own life felt like it was stuck in a loop, a repeating cycle of work, worry, and exhaustion. At lunchtime, Gus would let her have a bowl of the day's soup and a piece of bread. It was often her only real meal of the day, but for the past week, she had been skipping it. Instead, she asked Gus if she could take the cost of the meal out of her pay at the end of the day. $4 a day. Over a week, that was $20. $20 closer to the 68 she so desperately needed. She told herself she wasn't hungry, but her stomach growled in protest, a hollow, aching emptiness that mirrored the one in her heart. Today, however, she had made a promise to herself. Today, she would eat. She had managed to save up a small, secret stash of cash from an unexpected generous tip last weekend. A $20 bill, which she had carefully folded and hidden in a small pocket of her worn purse. It was her emergency fund, but today felt like an emergency for her soul. She planned to buy a proper meal tonight. A cheeseburger and fries from the diner. It was a simple thing, a small luxury, but it felt like an act of defiance. It was a way of telling the world, and herself, that she was still here, that she had not been completely consumed by the struggle. That small $20 bill was more than money. It was a symbol of a moment's peace, a brief respite from the constant hunger and worry. As the afternoon wore on, a dark line of clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind picked up, rattling the diner's big plate glass windows. The weatherman on the small TV behind the counter had predicted a storm, a real November monster, but no one had expected it to arrive so quickly and with such fury. By 5 o'clock, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it was a downpour. Rain hammered against the roof and streamed down the windows, blurring the world outside into a swirl of headlights and angry water. The dinner rush was slow. No one wanted to be out in this weather. The few customers who were there huddled in their booths, nursing cups of coffee, reluctant to brave the storm. Clara finished her shift, her back aching and her stomach cramping with hunger. She untied her apron and walked to the counter, the thought of the cheeseburger a beacon of light in her dreary day. "Gus, can I get the number 3 to go?" she asked, her voice quiet. Gus nodded. "Sure thing, Clara May. You earned it." As he turned to the grill, the bell above the diner's door chimed, a small, hopeful sound against the roar of the storm. 2 people stepped inside, shaking the rain from their coats. They were an elderly couple, and they looked utterly and completely out of place. The man was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a face etched with dignified lines. He wore a dark, expensive-looking overcoat, soaked through and dripping onto the checkered linoleum floor. The woman beside him was small and elegant, even with her gray hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her coat was a soft camel color, the kind of coat Clara had only ever seen in magazines. Its fabric was ruined, stained dark by the relentless downpour. They both looked lost, their eyes scanning the nearly empty diner with a mixture of relief and deep-seated weariness. Brenda hurried over with a pot of coffee. "Come on and out of that storm, folks. Find a warm booth." They slid into the booth by the window, the one Clara always thought of as the lucky booth. The woman's hands were trembling as she wrapped them around the warm coffee mug Brenda set down. The man looked at his wife with a deep, quiet concern that seemed to span decades. They didn't look at the menus. They just sat there, staring out at the storm, 2 shipwreck survivors on a small, turquoise island. Clara watched them from the counter, a strange feeling of pity stirring within her. They looked like people who had never known a moment of hardship in their lives, and now, hardship had found them in the middle of a Tuesday night storm. And Clara, an expert in the field of hardship, felt an odd kinship with them. Gus placed her to-go bag on the counter. The smell of the hot beef and greasy fries filled the air, making her stomach ache with anticipation. "Here you go, kid." She reached into her purse, her fingers closing around the crisp $20 bill she had been saving all week. It was her one small pleasure, her reward. But as she pulled it out, she glanced over at the couple again. The woman was opening her purse, a beautiful leather bag that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent. Her movements were becoming frantic. She dumped the contents onto the table. A silk scarf, a pair of glasses, a silver pen. But no wallet. The man began patting down his own pockets, first his overcoat, then his suit jacket underneath. A look of dawning horror crossed his face. He shook his head slowly, his eyes meeting his wife's. The story was written on their faces before a single word was spoken. They were stranded. No car, no phone, and now no money. And in that moment, Clara May Thompson, a woman who had nothing, looked at the only thing she had, a hot meal paid for with a $20 bill, and knew she was about to face the hardest choice of her life. A choice her grandfather would have understood completely. The smell of the cheeseburger was intoxicating. It was the scent of warmth, of a full stomach, of a brief, selfish moment of peace. Her hand, clutching the $20 bill, was slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed at her to take the bag, to walk out the door, to go home and eat the first satisfying meal she'd had in weeks. It was her money. She had earned it through hours of back-breaking work, through raw, bleeding hands and an aching spine. She deserved this. But then she looked at the old woman's face. It was a mask of quiet panic and profound embarrassment. The woman was trying to be brave, trying to maintain her composure, but her trembling hands and the quiver in her lower lip betrayed her. Her husband looked just as distressed, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder in a gesture of helpless comfort. They weren't just stranded, they were humiliated. And in their eyes, Clara saw a reflection of her own constant, gnawing fear. The fear of being helpless. The fear of being at the mercy of a world that didn't care. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. It's about making the hard right instead of the easy wrong. The easy wrong was to walk away. The hard right was staring her right in the face. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of her entire life, she walked over to their booth. The rich aroma of her cheeseburger followed her, a cruel temptation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The couple looked up, startled. Their faces were polite but wary, the way people of their class often looked at people of hers. I couldn't help but overhear," Clara stammered, feeling a hot blush creep up her neck. "It seems like you're in a bit of a jam." The man's expression hardened slightly, a shield of pride clicking into place. "We're fine, thank you. Our driver is just delayed." It was a lie, and all three of them knew it. The woman placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "It's all right, Walter. There's no need for that." She looked at Clara, her eyes a clear, intelligent blue. "We seem to have misplaced our wallets. And our car broke down about a mile up the road. The storm, it came on so suddenly. The tow truck won't come out in this weather," Walter added, his voice gruff with frustration. "And both of our phones are dead." Clara nodded, her heart aching with a strange mix of pity and recognition. She knew this feeling, the sudden, terrifying realization that you were completely cut off, that the thin threads holding your life together had snapped. She took a deep breath. "Are you hungry?" The woman's eyes flickered with a longing she quickly tried to conceal. "We're all right, dear. Thank you for your concern." But Clara saw the truth. She saw the exhaustion in their bones, the hunger that went deeper than just a missed meal. It was the hunger for warmth, for safety, for a moment of peace in the middle of a storm. She turned and walked back to the counter, her resolve hardening with each step. She pushed the bag with the cheeseburger and fries toward Gus, who was watching the exchange with a curious expression. "Can you give this to them?" she said quietly. "And 2 bowls of your tomato soup. The good stuff you make, not the canned." Gus raised an eyebrow. "That's your dinner, Clara May." "I'm not that hungry," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Her stomach cramped fiercely, as if in protest. She then did the hardest thing she had ever done. She placed the crisp, $20 bill on the counter. "This should cover it. And, if there's anything left over, could you call them a cab? To one of the nice hotels downtown. The Biltmore, maybe." Gus stared at her, his usual scowl gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He looked from the $20 bill to her tired face, and for the first time, he seemed to see past the worn-out waitress uniform to the woman underneath. He slowly took the money. "All right, Clara May. If you're sure." "I'm sure," she said, her voice stronger now. She didn't wait for their reaction. She couldn't bear to see it. She grabbed her thin coat, wrapped it tightly around herself, and pushed open the diner door. The wind and rain hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and plastering her hair to her face. She plunged into the storm, the warm, bright diner shrinking behind her, leaving her alone in the cold, wet darkness. The 3-mile walk home was a special kind of misery. Every step was a battle against the wind. The rain soaked through her coat and her jeans, chilling her to the bone. Her sneakers, already worn, were no match for the puddles that had formed in the cracked sidewalks. Within minutes, her socks were soaked and her feet were numb. The hunger, which had been a dull ache, now became a sharp, biting pain. Her stomach felt like a hollow drum, and with every gust of wind, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She thought about the cheeseburger, the hot, juicy beef, the melted cheese, the salty, crispy fries. She could almost taste it. She imagined the old couple in the warm, dry diner, eating her meal, and a wave of bitterness surprised her. Why her? Why was she the one who always had to make the sacrifice? The world was full of people with so much more to give. People for whom $20 was nothing, a rounding error in their bank accounts. For her, it was a feast. It was a lifeline. She stumbled, her foot catching on an uneven piece of pavement, and fell to one knee. The rough concrete tore through her wet jeans, scraping her skin. Pain shot up her leg. She stayed there for a moment, kneeling in the gutter, the cold, dirty water swirling around her. Tears of frustration and self-pity welled in her eyes, mixing with the rain on her face. It was all too much. The debt, the worry, the constant, grinding poverty. The sheer, unending exhaustion of it all. She wanted to give up. Just stay there. Let the storm wash her away. But then, an image flashed in her mind. Penny's face, sleeping peacefully in her little bed. Penny's smile when she got extra cinnamon on her toast. Penny's small hand tucked into hers. Penny. The thought of her daughter was like a jolt of electricity. It cut through the cold and the pain and the despair. She couldn't give up. For Penny, she had to be strong. For Penny, she had to keep fighting. She was a mother. That was a job that didn't allow for surrender. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself back to her feet. She ignored the stinging pain in her knee and the icy cold that had seeped into her bones. She leaned into the wind and put one foot in front of the other. She had a daughter to get home to. When she finally reached her small, rented house, she was a wreck. She was shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. Her clothes were dripping, creating a puddle on the worn linoleum of the entryway. She peeled off the wet layers, her fingers clumsy and numb. She tiptoed into the bedroom. Penny was still asleep, a small lump under the blankets. The sound of her soft, wheezing breath was a painful reminder of the medicine she still couldn't afford. Clara stood over her daughter for a long moment. The love she felt for her a fierce, protective fire in her chest. She had given away her meal, her one small comfort, for strangers. But for Penny, she would have given away the world. She went into the kitchen and drank a glass of water, trying to fill the aching void in her stomach. It didn't help. She opened the refrigerator. It was nearly bare. A half-empty jar of mustard, a wilting piece of lettuce, and the small bottle containing the last of Penny's asthma medication. She looked at the $11.42 on the counter. It wasn't enough for food, and it wasn't enough for the prescription. It was just enough to remind her of how trapped she was. She climbed into her own bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. The sheets felt cold and damp. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the evening. Had she done the right thing? A part of her, the practical, desperate part, screamed that she had been a fool. A sentimental, reckless fool. She had given away her last $20 to people who were probably richer than she could ever imagine. They had just forgotten their wallets. They would go back to their big, warm house and their comfortable lives and forget all about the poor waitress at the diner. But another part of her, the part that sounded a lot like her grandfather, whispered that she had done exactly what she was supposed to do. She had seen someone in need, and she had helped. It was as simple and as complicated as that. Character, he had said. It's what you do when you think you're all alone. Tonight, she had felt more alone than ever. And yet, she had chosen kindness. She eventually drifted into a restless, hungry sleep, filled with dreams of storms and empty plates. She woke up the next morning feeling worse than when she had gone to bed. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and the gnawing hunger was still there. But the storm had passed. A sliver of pale morning light was visible through a crack in the curtains. She went through the morning routine in a fog, her movements slow and heavy. She made Penny's cinnamon toast, her own stomach churning at the sweet smell. She walked Penny to the bus stop, the world feeling muted and gray. As the bus pulled away, a wave of hopelessness washed over her. It was a new day, but it was the same struggle, the same mountain of debt, the same $68 problem she had no idea how to solve. She turned to walk back to the house, her mind already calculating the hours until her next shift when she saw it. A car was parked in front of her house. It wasn't just any car. It was a long, black, gleaming sedan, the kind of car that belonged in a movie or parked in front of the mansions on the other side of town. It was so out of place on her rundown street that it looked like it had landed from another planet. A man in a dark suit and chauffeur's cap was standing beside the driver's side door, his posture stiff and formal. Clara's heart began to pound. Who was this? Was she in some kind of trouble? Had one of the collection agencies finally decided to send someone in person? The back door of the car opened, and a man stepped out. It took her a moment to recognize him. It was the old man from the diner. Walter. He was no longer the wet, disheveled figure from last night. He was wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face was calm and composed. He looked powerful. He looked rich, and he was standing on her broken sidewalk, looking directly at her. He smiled, a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Clara May Thompson?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Clara could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. "My name is Walter Covington," he said. "We met last night. I believe you did me a kindness. I've come to repay the favor." Behind him, the chauffeur opened the trunk of the car, and as Clara stared, her mind struggling to process what was happening, the man began to unload bag after bag of groceries onto the sidewalk. Clara stood frozen on the sidewalk, a statue carved from disbelief. The world seemed to have tilted on its axis, the familiar, drab colors of her street suddenly clashing with the impossible shine of the black sedan and the vibrant colors of the grocery bags. There were bags from Whole Foods, a store Clara only knew from window shopping, its aisles filled with foods she couldn't even pronounce, let alone afford. There were bags overflowing with fresh fruit, bright red apples, sunny yellow bananas, and deep purple grapes. There were bags filled with vegetables, crusty bread, cartons of milk and juice. It was more food than she had seen in one place in her entire life. I don't understand," she finally managed to say, her voice thin and reedy. Walter Covington took a step closer. His eyes, which had seemed cool and distant a moment ago, now held a glint of warmth. "It's quite simple, Miss Thompson. My wife, Eleanor, and I found ourselves in a difficult situation last night. We were cold, stranded, and frankly, a little frightened. You helped us. You gave us your meal. You paid for our taxi. This is a small gesture of our gratitude." The chauffeur, a large, silent man named Arthur, began carrying the bags to her front door, his movements efficient and respectful. He didn't look at her, as if to spare her any further embarrassment. "But it was just a cheeseburger," Clara stammered. "It was nothing." "It was not nothing," Walter said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It was everything. It was a beacon of warmth and decency on a very dark night. My wife was quite taken with your generosity. She insisted I find you. How did you know where I live?" The question came out before she could stop it. It sounded suspicious, accusatory. A faint smile touched Walter's lips. "You told the diner owner, Gus, to call us a cab to the Biltmore. I simply called Gus this morning. He was surprisingly forthcoming when I explained the situation. He seems to think quite highly of you." Clara's mind was reeling. Gus had helped him? She felt a strange mix of gratitude and violation. Her little life, her private struggles, had been laid bare for this wealthy, powerful stranger to see. Arthur had finished unloading the groceries and now stood silently by the car. The porch was covered in bags. It looked like a harvest festival had crash-landed on her doorstep. "Please," she said, shaking her head, taking a step back. "I can't accept all this. It's too much." Her pride, that stubborn, foolish thing that had kept her going for so long, was screaming at her. She was not a charity case. She was not some beggar to be pitied. Walter's expression softened. He looked at her small, shabby house, at the peeling paint and the cracked walkway. He seemed to see everything in a single, sweeping glance, not with judgment, but with a deep, unsettling understanding. "Miss Thompson, Clara May," he said, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. "May I be frank with you?" She nodded, unsure of what else to do. "I was not born into this," he said, gesturing to the expensive car, the suit, the chauffeur. "I grew up not 5 miles from here, on the other side of the old mill. My father worked there. He lost his job, just like everyone else, when it closed down. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to watch your parents count out pennies for a loaf of bread. I know what it feels like to think the world has forgotten you exist." Clara stared at him, speechless. This man, this millionaire, knew her life? It seemed impossible. "The first company I started," I built it out of a garage with $200 I borrowed from my uncle. I worked 18-hour days. I ate canned beans for dinner for 2 years. People see the success, but they don't see the struggle. They don't see the nights you lie awake, terrified that you're going to lose it all. He paused, his gaze becoming distant, as if he were looking back across the decades. Last night, for a few hours, my wife and we were reminded of what that feels like. The feeling of being completely helpless. And then a stranger, a young woman who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, showed us a kindness that I haven't witnessed in a very long time. You didn't do it for a reward. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That, Clara May, is a rare and precious thing. Please, allow me to honor it. Let me do this for you. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Tears were now streaming freely down Clara's face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a dam of pent-up emotion finally breaking. This man wasn't just giving her food. He was giving her something she hadn't realized she had lost, validation. He was telling her that he saw her. He saw her struggle, and he saw her strength. Okay, she whispered, the word choked with emotion. Okay. Walter gave a small, satisfied nod. He then glanced toward the front door, his sharp eyes noticing something taped to the inside of the window. It was the specialist's bill, the one with the glaring red numbers. He didn't stare, but she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He turned back to her, his expression now more serious, more businesslike. There is another matter I'd like to discuss. Gus mentioned that your daughter has some health issues. Asthma, I believe. Clara's heart seized with a new kind of fear. How much had Gus told him? She felt exposed, vulnerable, her deepest worries laid out for inspection. She nodded numbly. Yes. Her name is Penny. She's 7. My own granddaughter has asthma, Walter said, a shadow of pain crossing his face. I know the fear. I know the cost of the medication. The constant worry. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a long, white envelope. He held it out to her. I don't know the extent of your financial difficulties, and it's not my place to ask, but I imagine they are significant. This is not charity, Miss Thompson. This is an investment. An investment in the kind of person I want to see more of in this world. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. It was heavy, thick with paper. She didn't need to open it to know that it was a lot of money. More money than she had ever held in her hand. I can't, she started, but he held up a hand to stop her. You can, he said simply. And you will. Pay your daughter's medical bills. All of them. Get your furnace fixed. Buy your daughter a new coat for the winter. And then, I want you to think about your future. He handed her a business card. It was made of thick, creamy cardstock, the lettering embossed in a simple, elegant font. Walter Covington, CEO, Covington Enterprises. Below the name was a phone number. The man who drove me here, Arthur, his wife, runs my family's foundation. We help people. We provide educational grants, small business loans, job training. When you are back on your feet, I want you to call this number. We will find a place for you. A job, a career, something that uses your mind and your heart, not just your hands. Clara looked from the envelope to the business card, her mind a dizzying swirl of confusion and overwhelming gratitude. A job? A career? These were concepts that belonged to another life, a life she had long since stopped dreaming about. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why are you doing all of this for me? Walter Covington looked at her, and for the first time, his smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. It was a kind, weary, knowing smile. Because my grandfather was a man named Elias Thompson, he said softly. He was a sergeant in the 101st Airborne. During the war, in a firefight outside of Bastogne, he pulled 3 men from a burning tank. One of those men was my father. The world stopped. The bird song, the distant traffic, the rustle of the leaves. It all faded into a roaring silence in Clara's ears. Her grandfather, her hero, the man in the photograph on her kitchen wall. He saved my father's life, Walter continued, his voice thick with an emotion that spanned generations. My father never forgot it. He spent years trying to find Elias after the war, but he'd moved, and they lost touch. My father told me that story 100 times. He told me that everything we have, everything our family has become, is because of the bravery of a man named Elias Thompson. He told me that if I ever had the chance to repay that debt, I should do it without hesitation. He looked at Clara's stunned face. When Gus told me your last name this morning, I asked him if you were related to an Elias Thompson. He told me he was your grandfather. I believe, Clara May, that this is my chance to repay that debt. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Your grandfather saved my family. Last night, you reminded me what my family stands for. Kindness, decency, and paying our debts. It seems the Thompson family character is a strong one. He gave her a final, respectful nod. I will be in touch, Miss Thompson. Then he turned, got back into the black sedan, and was gone. Clara stood on the sidewalk, the thick envelope in one hand and the crisp business card in the other. Her porch was laden with food. Her world had been completely and irrevocably changed. She looked up at the sky, the pale morning sun warming her face, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt the unmistakable glimmer of hope. She thought of her grandfather, the quiet hero in the photograph, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that he would have been proud. She walked into her small house, the silence feeling different now. It was not the silence of despair, but the silence of possibility. She placed the envelope and the card on the kitchen table, right next to the $11.42. Then she began to carry in the groceries, one bag at a time. The first bag Clara brought inside was filled with fruit. The scent of fresh apples and oranges filled her small, musty kitchen, a fragrance of abundance and life that was so foreign it felt almost sacred. It was the smell of another world, a world she had only ever glimpsed through grocery store windows. One by one, she carried the bags from the porch, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were in a dream and any sudden motion might wake her. She lined them up on the floor, on the counters, on the small kitchen table. Her home, a place defined for so long by its emptiness and the constant echo of what they lacked, was now overflowing, a silent testament to the impossible turn her life had just taken. She unpacked everything with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing ancient treasures. A whole roasted chicken, still warm from the store, its skin crisp and golden. A thick loaf of sourdough bread that crackled when she touched it. A carton of real, creamy milk, not the powdered kind she mixed with water. There were cheeses wrapped in wax paper, boxes of pasta, bundles of fresh green asparagus, and a decadent-looking chocolate cake nestled in a clear plastic box. It was a feast, a bounty, a miracle delivered by a man in a black sedan. When everything was finally put away, the refrigerator hummed, full for the first time in Penny's life. The cupboards, once bare except for a bag of flour and some salt, were stocked and secure. Clara sat down at the kitchen table, her body finally succumbing to the emotional and physical exhaustion of the last 24 hours. The envelope lay before her, stark white against the worn wood grain of the table. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. Inside was a stack of crisp, $100 bills, held together by a simple paper clip. She counted it once, then twice, her lips moving but no sound coming out. $10,000. She stared at the money, the sheer, blunt reality of it refusing to sink in. It was a number she had only ever associated with debt, with the insurmountable mountain she had to climb every single day. To see it now, laid out on her table, as something that belonged to her, it was too much to comprehend. It was the price of a full night's sleep. It was the sound of her daughter breathing easily. It was freedom. It was safety. It was a future. Her first thought was of Penny's medicine. She looked at the clock. It was just after 9. Mr. Henderson's pharmacy would be open. She grabbed her purse, took one of the $100 bills. The paper felt impossibly smooth and official in her calloused hand, and practically ran out the door. The walk to the pharmacy, which usually felt like a journey of shame and anxiety, now felt light and hopeful. The sun was on her face. The air felt clean and new. When she walked into the pharmacy, Mr. Henderson looked up from behind the counter, his expression already one of polite regret, a look she knew all too well. Clara May, he began, his voice gentle. I'm afraid I can't. She cut him off by placing the $100 bill on the counter. The note landed with a soft, definitive whisper. I'd like to refill Penny's prescription, please, she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the pleading tremor it usually held. And I'd like to pay off my account. All of it. The pharmacist stared at the bill, then back at her, his eyes wide with surprise. He blinked, as if to make sure he was seeing correctly. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, erasing his professional weariness. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "Of course. Right away, Clara May." As he worked, she looked around the small shop, at the shelves filled with remedies and cures. For the first time, they didn't look like accusations of her failure. They just looked like help. When Mr. Henderson handed her the bag with 3 months' worth of Penny's medication and a receipt stamped, "Paid in full," Clara felt a profound sense of relief wash over her, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She had done it. She had finally slain one of the dragons that had been chasing her for so long. Her next stop was the specialist's office. She paid the $2,847 bill without flinching. The receptionist, a woman who had always treated her with a cool, professional distance, now looked at her with a newfound respect, even offering a small, tight smile. Money, Clara was quickly learning, was its own language, and it changed the tone of every conversation. She spent the rest of the day extinguishing the many small fires of her life. She paid the overdue rent, the electric bill, the gas bill. At each stop, she felt a piece of her burden fall away. The weight on her shoulders, the one she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it, was finally lifting. That evening, when Penny came home from school, she walked into a different world. The house was warm, the furnace having been repaired that afternoon by a man who came within an hour of being called and paid in cash. The air smelled not of damp and worry, but of roasting chicken and baking potatoes. Penny stopped in the doorway, her little nose twitching, her eyes wide. "What's all that?" she asked, pointing to the remaining groceries still waiting to be fully put away. "That, my sweet pea," Clara said, scooping her daughter up into a hug that was fierce with relief, "is dinner." They sat at the kitchen table and ate like royalty. Penny had 3 glasses of milk and 2 helpings of chicken. Clara watched her, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. It wasn't just the food. It was the look on Penny's face, the absence of the small, worried frown that usually creased her brow. For the first time in a long time, Penny looked like a child without a care in the world. After dinner, Clara gave her the new inhaler. "You don't have to worry about this running out anymore, honey. We have plenty now." Penny looked at the new device, then up at her mother, her expression serious. "Are we rich now, Mommy?" she asked, her voice full of innocent curiosity. Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep within. "No, sweet pea. We're not rich. We're just okay. And for now, okay is everything." For the next few weeks, life was a gentle dream. Clara quit her job at the diner, giving Gus 2 weeks' notice. He had just grunted, but she saw the proud smile he tried to hide. Brenda had hugged her tight, tears in her eyes. "You deserve this, hon. You really do." Clara spent her days just being a mother. She walked Penny to and from the bus stop. She helped her with her homework. They went to the park and fed the ducks. They went to the library and checked out a tall stack of books. They did all the simple, normal things that had once felt like impossible luxuries. She bought Penny a new winter coat, a bright pink one with a furry hood that tickled her nose. She bought herself a new pair of shoes, ones without holes in the soles. But as the days turned into weeks, a new feeling began to creep in. The money was a buffer, a shield against the world, but it wasn't a purpose. She thought about the business card Walter Covington had given her. It sat on her nightstand, a silent promise and a daunting challenge. The idea of calling that number terrified her. What would she say? What could she possibly offer a man like that? She was a dishwasher, a high school graduate with a history of bad luck. The world he lived in was as foreign to her as the moon. One morning, she was standing in the kitchen, looking at the old photograph of her grandfather. His steady, determined gaze seemed to be looking right at her. He hadn't been afraid. He had walked into fire to save men he didn't even know. And here she was, afraid to make a simple phone call. "Character ain't what you do when folks are watching, Clara May." His voice seemed to rumble in her memory. "It's what you do when you think you're all alone." For the first time, she realized he wasn't just talking about kindness. He was talking about courage. She took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and with a hand that shook only slightly, she dialed the number on the card. A polite, professional voice answered. "Covington Foundation. How may I help you?" "My name is Clara May Thompson," she said, her own voice sounding strange and formal to her ears. "Mr. Covington, he told me to call." She was put through to a woman named Margaret, Arthur, the chauffeur's wife. She was warm and kind, with a gentle laugh that immediately put Clara at ease. Margaret spoke to her not as a charity case, but as a person of interest. She asked about Clara's skills, her interests, what she liked to do. Clara, hesitant at first, found herself talking about her love of organizing, her knack for remembering details, the quiet satisfaction she used to get from making sure the diner's chaotic storeroom was in perfect order. It felt silly saying it out loud, but Margaret listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. A week later, she had an interview. 2 weeks after that, she had a job. She started as an administrative assistant at the foundation's main office. On her first day, she felt as out of place as the old couple had in the diner. The building was a tower of glass and steel, the lobby hushed and gleaming. Everyone was dressed in smart, tailored clothes, and they moved with a quiet confidence that intimidated her. But Margaret was there to greet her, her smile a welcome beacon. She showed Clara to her desk, which had a new computer and a small, potted orchid. No one had ever given Clara flowers before. The work was a steep learning curve. She had to learn new computer programs, new ways of speaking, a whole new culture of acronyms and deadlines. But for the first time in her life, she was using her mind. She was solving problems, not just enduring them. And she discovered, to her own surprise, that she was good at it. Her years of juggling bills, of stretching every dollar, of meticulously planning every detail of her and Penny's survival, had given her a unique set of skills. She was resourceful, efficient, and unflappable. Months turned into a year. She was promoted, given more responsibility. She was tasked with helping manage a program that provided support for single mothers, helping them find job training, affordable childcare, and safe housing. Here, she found her true calling. She saw her own story reflected in the faces of the women she met. She saw their fear, their desperation, but also their fierce, unyielding hope. And she was able to give them what Walter Covington had given her, a chance. She met a young woman named Maria, who had 2 small children and had just lost her job. Maria's hands were raw and chapped, just like Clara's had been, and her eyes held that same haunted look. Clara sat with her, not from behind a desk, but side by side in the waiting area. She didn't just process her paperwork. She listened to her story. She helped Maria enroll in a nursing assistant program, found a subsidized daycare near the school, and gave her grocery cards to get her through the first few months. She was a guide, a confidant, a living example that the storm does, eventually, pass. She never saw Walter Covington in the office, but she felt his presence everywhere. His philosophy of practical, respectful kindness was woven into the very fabric of the foundation. He wasn't just giving handouts, he was building ladders. He was investing in people, in their potential. One evening, about 2 years after that fateful night at the diner, Clara was working late, reviewing an application for a new community health initiative. It was a proposal to fund a mobile asthma clinic for low-income neighborhoods. As she read through the projected outcomes, the number of children who would receive free medication, the number of emergency room visits that would be prevented, she thought about Penny. Her daughter hadn't had a serious asthma attack in over a year. She was thriving in school, a bright, happy girl who filled their small, new apartment with vibrant paintings. Clara looked out the window of her office. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of a million different stories. She thought about the strange, invisible threads that connect us all. The thread that stretched from a battlefield in France decades ago, from her grandfather to a young soldier he'd never see again. A thread that had woven its way through time, through a family's success and gratitude, and had found its way to a rain-slicked diner on a miserable Tuesday night. It had found her when she was at her lowest, when she thought she was completely alone. A single act of kindness, she realized, is never a single act. It's a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples spread outward, touching lives you may never know, creating waves of change that can travel across generations. Her grandfather had thrown a stone of courage. She had, in her own small way, thrown a stone of compassion. And Walter Covington had turned those ripples into a tidal wave of grace. Her life was no longer about survival. It was about purpose. She was no longer just Penny's mother. She was Clara Mae Thompson, a woman who helped change lives. She packed her briefcase, the smooth leather a world away from the worn canvas bag she used to carry. Walking out of the gleaming office building, She wasn't hunched against the cold, but stood tall, a woman who had found her place. When she got home, Penny was at the table, finishing her homework. She had drawn a picture. It was of their family, just the two of them, standing in front of a small, cozy house. But above them, in the sky, she had drawn a smiling old man in a soldier's uniform, watching over them like a guardian angel. "That's great-grandpa Elias," Penny said, pointing with her crayon. "You told me he was a hero." Clara knelt beside her, her heart aching with love and gratitude. "He was, sweet pea," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He really was. She realized then that being a hero wasn't always about grand gestures on a battlefield. Sometimes, it was about sharing a meal in a storm. It was about choosing hope over despair. It was about making the hard right instead of the easy wrong. And in doing so, she hadn't just saved two strangers. She had saved herself. But this story isn't just about Clara. It's about what happens when ordinary people choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Right now, somewhere in your own town, a single parent is skipping meals so their child can eat. A neighbor is giving without expecting anything back, and someone is making a choice that may ripple far beyond what they can see. Because kindness doesn't end with the person who gives, it multiplies. So here's what I want you to do. Think about the last time someone sacrificed for you, even in a small way. Share it in the comments, so we can remember together that generosity isn't rare, it's waiting in each of us. Like this video if you believe one act of kindness can echo across generations. And subscribe for more real stories proving that ordinary choices can create extraordinary change. Because somewhere tonight, someone is giving up their only meal, and in doing so, they might just be changing everything.